So now we're gonna make a chips and salsa bowl, and if you've watched me throw the donut or the juicer, you'll see it's kind of the same initial process. You're gonna throw something really, or center something really low, get a nice flat piece, push it down a little bit more. The clay nice and centered low, and again you do that because that way you don't have to stretch the clay as much. It doesn't have to work as hard for you. And you're just you're doing less, making less of an effort to get it into the shape you want if you center it sort of in the shape you're going to want in the end. So like if you want something tall, you center it tall, so the clay doesn't have to stretch as far. So with the chips and salsa bowl, we're going to have a bowl in the middle and then a tray that comes out around it so you can lay all the chips in around and put the salsa in the middle. So that's what we're going to throw today. And I'm going to sort of think about how much clay do I want in the middle. And so I'm going to open it up in the center first. You always open it up in the center first. In this case, I'm not opening all the way to the bottom. I'm going to want to leave a bottom because I'm throwing a bowl here. I'm not opening it up all the way to the wheel head. I want to make sure that there's, a bowl underneath this, because that's where the salsa is going to go. I'm going to check and see how deep that is. Okay, I still need to push it down a little bit more. Push it out, push it down. So this is where my bowl is going to be for the salsa. That's about right. And then I'm going to kind of make a trough over here, thinking about how much clay do I want to still have in the middle to throw my bowl. So I'm going to make a trough where I leave myself enough clay right here to have the size of bowl that I want for this piece. So digging down again, not all the way to the wheel head, again just enough to leave a bottom on the chips and salsa bowl. Now this is one of the few things that I don't like to trim a foot on. I usually just leave the bottom flat for this kind of a piece. So I'm not thinking about leaving enough clay for a foot at this point. Normally I am, but in this case I'm not. So I just want to get it thick enough, but not too thick, to be the bottom of the piece. Alright, so when I make these kinds of things where I'm doing these multiple parts, like with the lemon squeezer or the juicer and the donut, I like to throw the center part first, because I feel like once I throw that, then I don't want to have to throw this after this is thrown. I feel like I'm going to bump that edge with my hands. So I want to throw this first. Pull this up into a bowl. It's a little dry. Always keep it wet. If it's dry, it's going to catch on your hands and you're going to screw up your shape. So always make sure it's slippery. Here's a cute little bowl in the middle. Think about what kind of a shape of a bowl and how big of a bowl do you want to put your salsa in, and your chips and salsa. I suppose it could be other kinds of dip, but I always think of these as chips and salsa bowls. Give yourself a nice lip for the glaze to sit on. Don't ever pull these lips real skinny. They chip easily and the glaze breaks away off of them, so they're not strong and they're not pretty. Give yourself a nice lip. Even if your bowl is thin, don't pull that lip super thin. Okay, I think that's about what I want for my bowl. Push on it a little bit more down here. Okay. Now I'm going to throw the rest of it. And was this 10 pounds?
Yes.
Yeah, this is 10 pounds of clay. This is what you're looking at. And you may have seen also that I'm throwing it on a bat. I never throw these things, these kinds of pieces that are awkward to pick up. I don't throw them directly on the wheel head. I give myself a bat that I can pick up the bat instead of the piece. Save you, make it easier to make this piece successful is to throw it on a bat. So I attached a bat to the wheel head before I centered my clay. Okay, I'm just gonna pull this out. I'm gonna be methodical about it. I never try to be in a hurry when I'm throwing. I know that it's more impressive if you can throw really fast, but I'm not really interested in being that kind of a showman. I like to do things methodically and carefully. So I'm going to just sort of carefully create this. I'm pushing it outward and trying not to slope downward with my hand. This is sort of like when you're throwing a plate or a big platter. You're trying to go horizontally as best you can without sloping down. Push this. Always recompress in here. One of the things that happens to a lot of people when they throw these is they end up with cracks in here on the inside because they're not pressing down enough on the clay. You end up with a crack through the middle if you're not giving it a lot of pressure. And that's what I'm doing right now with my sponge to make sure that that doesn't happen. It's very frustrating to go through this process and then end up with these big cracks down in the middle. That happen in the kiln, actually. You won't even see it in the drying process, but it'll get a big crack across the middle because you didn't compress the clay enough and make it all sort of forced together with pressure. So go in there with your sponge and press on it. Okay, that's what I'm doing here. Okay, now I'm going to get back to throwing the piece. Throwing it, pushing it out, and slow your wheel down a little bit. This is going to be where the clay wants to flop around a little, so especially if you're pulling outward now in this part, pulling outward to create the rim of the bowl. Okay, recompress that lip a little bit so that you don't get a crack there. I'm going to kind of press that together. As you pull, push that down. It's a little dry. If you want to use the sponge to throw with, a lot of people do, and it's also a way to not have to use as much water because the sponge doesn't catch on the clay the way that your hands do. The clay can be somewhat dry even, and the sponge will still move smoothly across the clay. So that's one of the reasons I grab my sponge right now is because I don't want to keep putting water on the clay. I prefer to throw with my hands, but every once in a while I'll bring in the sponge for that reason. Okay, and just sort of like carefully refine it. Even it out. We need to even it out a little bit in here. I actually want to use this tool, this wooden tool, to kind of level out my floor. This tool helps a lot with that sort of thing. It also helps to compress that area. You know, we got to make sure that that area is not going to get a big crack in it. So use this tool, and I like this one for this piece because it has a curve here, and this curve can sit in here against the edge of this where I have it, where it's curving upward and not flatten it. So this piece, this is one of my favorite tools. Just flatten that out. Get my ridges out of there. Now, I always like to go back and put my finger marks back. Throwing marks in the floor of the piece. There we go. So we're about done, except for there's a little bit of water in here to get that out. Here. But I also think I'm going to give it one last. I like to go in, I always do this, go into the edges of my pots before it comes off the wheel with the needle tool and just make sure it's level. Make sure it's perfectly level. There's going to be a little bit of up and down from hand throwing things, so I like to go in and do that pretty much every time. Get that leveled out. I do it here too. That way you know you have a nice level bit. And the thing about trimming these, one of the reasons I don't like to try to do a foot or turn it over to trim it, I just smooth it, because a lot of times the bowl is taller than the outer form, and you're trying to set it on the upside down, so you're going to be setting it on the little bowl, and it's not going to work very well for you trying to trim. So there it is. That's a chips and salsa bowl. And again, like I said, it's kind of like it's a similar process to making a donut or making a lemon squeezer, a juicer. I keep wanting to call it that. We're making a juicer or a chips and salsa bowl. You're kind of starting with a low-centered piece of clay. You're opening it up in the middle. Then you're cutting a trough and pulling up two separate parts to create the form. Okay, that's it.